Yeah, good afternoon. This panel is on the media, broadly the media, and we have with us Caroline Overington from Australia. She is, unless Wikipedia has got fake news, your list of what all you have done is truly impressive. She has worked in 2 continents, has won many awards, and has written books of non-fiction and fiction. And what interests me is that she has written books on crime as well. So maybe, after the Scandinavian crime genre, now turn of Australian genre, like to explore that. She is the associate editor of the Australian, which I think is the leading newspaper in Australia. And to my extreme left is Naresh Fernandes, who's the editor of Scroll, the founder editor, if I can say, from 2013. And he has, before that, he was in journalism at Times of India, and he worked in the United States. And the other hat he wears is, he's an aficionado of jazz. He has written a history of jazz, and has also written a delightful little book about Bombay, right? Bombay Today. I haven't read the jazz book, but I've read the Bombay book, and I would strongly recommend it. The previous session, there was a discussion on the media and how it covers women's violence. In a sense, media today, how would there's a crisis of many kinds, and this seems to be across the world for a larger measure. There's a crisis, there's a financial crisis, more in the print media than elsewhere. But the bigger crisis is of its failure as an institution of speaking truth to power. Now, there are differences between countries, there are differences between print, TV, online, etc. But overall, it seems to be that in the past 10 years in particular, the media as an institution has been suffering a loss of legitimacy. Now, different people have different reasons for that. Some say that it is partly caused from within. Okay, in the search for profits, it has lost its sense of purpose, a mission to be the fourth estate. The other, and many would say a more powerful trend more recently, is that it is being delegitimized by fake news. Okay, fake news which is peddled sometimes by the executive itself, like in the US, where Trump calls the media fake news. Okay? Otherwise, it's also delegitimized by pumping out, what we would call the WhatsAppization of news, in India, where WhatsApp stories are spread so quickly, enormously, one could say, that the media, all that it seems to have to do is to run after and check this WhatsApp news. So we're in that kind of system now, and maybe we could start with asking Caroline how she sees, whether she could tell us the state of the media in Australia, especially the broadsheet media, and what legitimacy it enjoys. Because I think for most of us here, we know very little about Australian media. For some of us, our only knowledge of Australian media is from Channel 9 and Kerry Pack from 40 years ago, and that is the home of Rupert Murdoch. I mean, that's about the...
All right. Well, I think you're quite right in saying that we have seen a profound change in the media landscape. So it was when I was a child, the media was the newspaper that was delivered in the morning and the television news in the evening. And I would be certain, I think, to say that most of you now do not get your news that way. Although I have been impressed visiting India for the first time to see how many of you still do read an old-fashioned paper newspaper. It's delivered to your hotel. You see people reading it in the street. That's very rare in Australia now. Most people get their news online. And as a result, you get a very different product than you used to. In the old days, you got a newspaper that was curated very lovingly by a series of very experienced editors, many of whom had grown up in the tradition of journalism and had grown up wanting to ensure an educated populace. And now you get a stream of bile, of fake fake news, yes, but also abuse, homophobia, racism, uncurated, unedited, unpublishable in the old style of journalism, unconstrained by libel laws, unconstrained by the laws of defamation. That is now your diet. And you live or die by that. And we are seeing that in Australia, of course. Most people now get their news either from Facebook or from Twitter, a little bit less from Instagram, which still has some niceness about it, but that is now the diet you eat. And those of us who are old enough to remember the old offering feel very sad about it.
Yeah, Naresh, the same question, put a bit differently. If you look at the media as a reader and viewer, not as an editor, and look at what has happened to the Indian media the past 5-6 years, to use a strong term, would you say that the media has betrayed society? No, let me, before I put you on the dock. The reasons for it, as I amplified in the beginning, can be partly from within, on the forces that are being exerted on it, that it was not able to stand up, but at the same time, the forces assaulting the media, political, organized, unorganized, etc., were far too powerful, okay? And as part of that, related to that is the switch, even in India, the young now increasingly get their news from social media. Very few among them, I think, actually read a newspaper either on the web or, in the old-fashioned way.
Ram, I definitely agree with you. We have lost a sense of purpose. That the people should know is now not an aim that we conduct our journalism by. It's sort of what the advertiser will allow us to tell and what the politician will allow us to tell. It's an astonishing thing to especially flip through the English newspaper, TV channels every night, and except for one or two exceptions, you will hear a great deal about the flaws of the opposition and very little that holds the government to account. We've turned into, instead of being watchdogs, we've turned into lapdogs. And it's really very disheartening for those of us who've been around for a little while to have known that have worked in a media that once really sort of was galvanized and saw the press as a medium for change, especially in a country like India. And as you pointed out, sort of there are many different reasons for this. One, of course, is that as an economic model is in flux, newspaper proprietors are willing to do almost anything to keep themselves afloat. And so we've had the very disconcerting phenomenon of paid news. The Times of India, when I worked there 20 years ago, sort of was among the pioneers in kicking this off when Samir Jain, the proprietor of the Times of India, said that his business was selling eyeballs to advertisers, that the news was mainly the stuff that filled the columns between the advertisements. And we've gone all the way downhill from there. It's also that now we work in the age of politicians who want to delegitimize the media, as you pointed out, people like Trump and Modi, because they want to get their messages out to people unfiltered and unvarnished. They believe that their Man Ki Baat must be monologues without newspapers or journalists providing the context that's so essential for calling out whatever we call this, post-truth, alternative facts, or bullshit, as we used to call it in the old days.
Yeah, Caroline, can you tell us a bit, how does, not just your paper, but the Australian media as a whole, does it suffer from the same kind of spoke about that the Indian media does currently? Two, how does it handle fake news, whataboutery, and even things like false equivalence?
One of the biggest problems that Australian journalists make, and perhaps it's true worldwide, is that we perceive ourselves to be part of the solution when most of the people in most of the population regard us as part of the problem. They see that media traditionally has not represented them or their views. They feel entirely ignored by the mainstream media. There is a reason they are fleeing to other news sources. It is because they don't see themselves reflected in the media of old. We have to challenge the central idea, I think, that the media is somehow here on behalf of the public, telling you what to think, because that is currently the model we operate. There are too many media outlets who are making the same mistake as politicians are making, particularly in opposition here in India and in opposition in Australia, that the public is stupid. The public is not stupid. And they are also telling the public that they are, well, for example, Hillary Clinton described her opponents as deplorable. That is no way to win hearts and minds, and it's certainly no way to win anybody over to your side of the argument. If you have an argument, let's hear it. Let's debate it. Let's talk about it. Let's be rational with each other, kind to each other, patient with each other. But to simply have a media that sits up on high and tells the population, this is how you should think, for sure they're leaving the room.
Yeah, to take on that, that's a bit of a provocative statement to make. So would you see that as a part of the problem was within, that earlier we tended to, we meaning we in the media, tended to look down on readers, look down on the larger population, that we were handing out news that we thought that needed to have. And what you're seeing now is in part a reaction, if I can paraphrase what you're saying. Do you think that is something that is it, you could say that about Indian media as well?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think 30 years ago, the Indian mainstream press did have a developmental agenda. And rural reporting, labor reporting, all of these things were very important beats in the newspaper. I think with the transition, what I see now is that it's actually the so-called populist TV channels, most often, but also print outlets, that are being condescending to their readers. They're not really representing them. They're the ones who are feeding them misinformation, and they're doing so with the delusion that their readers are stupid, that their audiences are stupid. And I think the recent eruption of protests across India is a sign that ordinary Indians are standing up and saying, we don't believe you anymore. You may tell us that the CAA was a fantastic thing, but we know it isn't, and we're going to put our bodies on the street to tell you that. For the last 5 years, they've taken a lot of nonsense from the mainstream media and from WhatsApp University. We saw this, I think, in great measure first when demonetization happened, where almost immediately the press and social media swarmed in with all sorts of ridiculous rationalizations for why taking away 86% of the currency was a very good thing. There was a comedian who lives in my neighborhood who was so annoyed by this. He put out a video saying that, it's really a good thing because these new 2,000 rupee notes, they've made it with microchips. And if you stack enough of them together, they will be detected from outer space. And so, this government is very smart. If anybody piles up enough of black money, it will be detected. Before we knew it, this was actually being repeated on mainstream channels. Readers now know that I keep saying readers because I'm old school, audiences now know that they've been taken for a ride, and they're not going to stand up for it anymore. So no, I think it's actually the populist channels that are being condescending, not the media of old.
Yeah, I'll come back to you. I just want you to keep this question. That TV, English TV, and I presume Indian language TV also, it has played such a negative role in India. Yet, viewership doesn't seem to have been affected. Even the most vicious, there have been no boycotts, etc. We'll come back to that. Caroline, how do you see, Australian broadcast media. You have worked in the print media predominantly. In India, I don't know if you know, we have some 400 channels plus.
I'm excited to see more of them.
Well, well, some of us aren't. There are various reasons why they are functioning and what they purvey. In fact, TV in India, and I would say this of both English and many languages, is far less a provider of news than tendentious opinion. If you were to watch TV news today, you wouldn't see anybody out in the field interviewing people. They would all be sitting in 4 different rooms and shouting at each other. And that's essentially what. Some say that this is super fox. It's a hyperventilated fox. Is there a similar phenomenon in Australia?
Fox, I do like that. It's a similar phenomenon in that the model for financial survival for media is broken. There, as you say, it used to be there were a lot of advertising in print media and advertising on the television, and now there is not. And opinion is something that media has found that it can monetize. If you have a person putting forward very strong opinions, you will get a lot of readers, you will get a lot of listeners, you will get a lot of people watching, and you can monetize that. And media is, after all, a business. It's a business. We like to imbue it with a sense of social purpose and with imagining ourselves as a fourth plank in the democracy. But that isn't the way those who own the companies see it. They need to make money. It's easier to make money from opinion than real reporting. On the ground, that is having a real impact. We can, my newspaper, The Australian, is a national daily newspaper, a broadsheet newspaper, the only one left now in the country. We can no longer cover every court case. We can no longer sufficiently cover every parliament. We don't really cover all of the issues that we should. Things like violence against women in Australia is an important issue. We can't cover it in the way we should. Journalism is expensive. And so, of course, it's easier to monetize opinion. But I push back very hard against the idea that there is some opinion that should be shut down. I simply don't accept it. I think at the moment there is a call in Australia for my newspaper to be shut down. We should be shut down. You should cancel your subscription. We are a cancer on democracy. We are essentially, we should be closed. The question I ask is, by whom? Who should close us? The government? That's the kind of country you want to live in now, where the government will close down a media organization because you don't like what it says? Or indeed that there is any opinion. If you don't like it, don't watch it, don't listen to it, walk away from it, find your news and your opinion elsewhere. But the idea that we solve the very many problems, and in India at the moment, I think this is a real fight for survival. You are in the fight for the soul of your country, but you won't win it by somehow deriding the audience or by somehow dismissing the opposition and the supporters of Modi. You won't win it. You have to engage with them. And the only way to do that is through the media.
Actually, here the engagement is not happening the other side. Naresh, my question about, what is it that makes these virulent channels become more and more popular, or rather, they're not seeing, people are not going away, saying, let's switch off, I won't watch that, I'll watch something on Netflix. They're continuing to command it. Is it that the whole language of TV media has changed such that,
we are seeing journalism on TV as blood sport. And you said 4 people in 4 different rooms. No, it's often 15 people in 15 rooms all speaking at the same time. It's a truly marvelous thing to watch. But the large sections of the media have been handmaidens in the project of making this new India. And the idea of the sort of muscular nationalism is very infectious. And as politicians sell that, this is what the media is also selling. I think we have reached an inflection point. And I think perhaps we're going to see, we've seen some channels, for instance, that were pretty right-wing. After the JNU incident, for instance, had to relook at the way they were doing some of their stories and realize that this was actually a very one-sided attack on helpless students. I hope we will see more of that now.
One last question before we can throw it open for discussion. You spoke about, a call to shut down the Australian. Is it about the coverage of the bushfires? Is it about accusations that, denying climate crisis? Or is it about a general approach of the Australian that a small section, of readers are unhappy and are calling for this? I mean, what has provoked this? I mean, if there's only one national daily,
It's not a small section of the community, it's a large section of the community that don't like the Australian. And I think that's fine. You can read the Sydney Morning Herald, you can read the Guardian, you can get your news from Facebook or from Twitter or from the Saturday paper, 1,000 other outlets. In fact, people sometimes talk about the crisis in media as if we don't now have more voices and more outlets than ever. If you're a young person thinking of entering journalism, when I entered journalism, you worked for the one newspaper in your city or perhaps the one television station. Whereas now you come out of university and you have so many options available to you. You can go and work for a website that might lead to a book that could be made into a film, and then you'll have a podcast, and there are 1,000 different outlets for people in the way there never was before. But there is a call for news limited papers owned by Rupert Murdoch, to be shut down. And I feel they are not interested in the fact that the pages are full of art and music and theatre and commentary and crime and politics and all of the different stories that make up the newspaper every day. They are interested in the parts they don't like. And because there is opinion that they don't like, or because the decision made by the editor on a particular day is something they don't like, their reflex is to say it should be shut down, or people who work there should feel disgraced, or there should be violence, acts of violence committed against people who work there. At the moment, we have protests outside our office where you have to step over people who are lying on the ground to get in. We have young people working for us who are raising money for the bushfires, who are running raffles for the bushfires, who are running marathons for the bushfires, social media campaigns for the bushfires. We have reporters who have been out in the field, their lives in danger, covering the bushfires. But none of that matters. But because an opinion columnist wrote something that somebody didn't like, we should be shut down. That is an instinct against which I will always push, because at some point it will be your point of view that the powers don't like, and you will be the one that's at risk. And in a civil democracy, we can't defend the notion of censorship.
Thank you. So yesterday I was in a webinar with Ms. Nidhi Razdan, and she pointed out a very interesting fact. She said that journalists should not be activists. And she said about how how the media is influencing opinions today, and yet they're not doing it right. So what exactly needs to change in Indian media today to bring about a very neutral perspective towards journalism and not an opinionated view?
I think one of the problems is sort of TV news every night, because now the standard format is the debate. Journalists, and Nidhi and her colleagues at NDTV do a pretty good job in remaining neutral, but Arnab Goswami, for instance, sees himself as a participant in the debate, as a provocateur in the debate. And that definitely needs to change. But Ram and I were talking earlier about the difference between opinion and fact. And I think the problem is many, especially younger readers, don't see this difference anymore. In the old days, when you got your newspaper, you knew that that middle page, probably where the fold was, there were the edits on this page and the op-eds on the other side. When you read your news online, you're just getting this as a constant stream. You can't tell the difference between what a report is, what an opinion piece is, and often it doesn't matter. And these are, again, this is sort of we're in the middle of sort of flux in terms of the way news is consumed. And I think this will take a little while to sort itself out until people begin to appreciate and value fact rather than the screechy headline. I think among the things that also contributes to this is the fact that online, you are going to, we have the phrase clickbait. You're going to click on the thing that is the most shrill, the most screechy. And so audiences are also, in a way, to blame for this.
Right.
Hello, Caroline. Your most controversial commentator in the Murdoch media,
I'm
Andrew.
sorry, I can't immediately see where you are.
Here.
Last slide.
Oh, hello, it's Stephen. Hello.
The most controversial commentator in the Murdoch media, who was in the tabloids and is in about 6 tabloids, and is also on the Murdoch television news, Sky, Andrew Bolt, has suggested that climate change is imagined. Yet at the same time, the CSIRO, the Meteorological Organisation, the World Meteorological Organisation, NASA, the US Oceanographic Association, the big mining companies, the very big Swiss and German reinsurance companies, that there is a general view that climate change is a scientific fact. Now, Rupert Murdoch himself has alternated. He's said on one occasion it's not true, on another occasion he said he accepts it. But Bolt has an enormous tribe of followers. Now, should a responsible editor say that these sorts of articles, which are not providing significant scientific facts, are like a little tadpole swimming against a sort of Pacific Ocean of science and institutions, should actually not be published on this subject? That's not censorship. That's an editorial decision about accuracy. And okay, commentary does give you a little bit of freedom, but it's an editorial decision about accuracy. So the question is Andrew Bolt just worth too much money, or should he actually not be able to write articles saying that climate change doesn't exist?
Thank you for your question. News Limited accepts the science of climate change and has done for many years. The Australian accepts that climate change is happening and has done for many years. The debate during the bushfires was how to manage not even the threat, but the reality of climate change arriving on our doorstep in the form of an inferno that took out 33 lives and hundreds of thousands of hectares of precious native forest and the lives of nearly 1 billion animals. Our debate was over how do we respond. Now, Andrew Bolt, if he does or doesn't accept the science of climate change, I don't know. I don't read him. If he doesn't accept the science of climate change, then I disagree with him vehemently. I couldn't disagree with him more. I think it is happening. I think we need to be passionate in our response to it. And I think our newspapers are. And they are considering all of the different options. Do we burn some of the forest using indigenous fire methods that are known to reduce some of the undergrowth? Do we fund our fire brigade to have more air support than we have at the moment? What do we do about the fact that climate change has exacerbated the problem as it lands on our doorstep? Is a debate that we must have. It's pointless to say we can't have this debate. But your question seems to be, would I stop somebody from saying, it's not true, I don't believe it? No, I wouldn't. I would not stop anybody from saying what they believe to be true, because I have the freedom to say, well, you're an idiot, because NASA says, and the CSIRO says, and the Smithsonian says, and 95% of scientists say that this is a fact. I don't think they're all in a cult together. I don't think they have any reason to deliberately mislead us. I don't think they're having a jolly. I think there is money to be made from renewables that sometimes propel some of the argument in certain directions. But I think that the instinct to shut people down ends with Donald Trump. Because if you shut people down and you call them stupid or you ignore them, you don't let them have their say, you push them into a corner, you end up with Donald Trump. That's the trajectory.
My question is to Ms. Carolyn. I'm a regular reader of Australian online, and
Thank goodness for you. Are you paying for your subscription?
no, no, I'm not. And it's very nice to see a journalist from Australian here. What's your opinion on media houses in this region of Telangana, and does the Australian have any plans to set up an office, their outlet in this region? And how do you what's your opinion about the media trends in the local region of Telangana?
The local region here, you mean?
Yes, yes.
I can say with almost 100% certainty that the Australian is not thinking of opening an office in India at the moment. We did for a long time have a correspondent in India. In fact, my colleague who is here in the audience, I think, was a correspondent in India for the Australian. And John, who has now written several books on Indian history and is a student of your country and a lover of your country. I'm not qualified to speak about politics in this region. I'm going to hand over to my learned colleague.
Yeah. Briefly, please.
Can social media platforms do more to promote fact-based journalism? And what are some of the challenges of running a digital media platform, especially in reaching regional audiences?
Yeah, so among the things that people like me who work for digital platforms tear our hair out about, and you can see I have none left, is these mystical algorithms that determine our fates, both Google and Facebook. And we have no idea why they decide to boost some stories and not others. They increasingly have come to realize that they are playing a role in the way news gets around. And they have also put into place, therefore, some sort of programs and initiatives, especially fact-checking initiatives. So both Boom Live and I think Prateek Sinha's Alt News have been involved in various fact-checking initiatives, especially for Facebook. So now sometimes on Facebook, if you see a story, it will say, this story has been deemed to be not accurate, and go to the fact check. I think that's a good idea. Regional media, I think, again, it has to do with the ecosystem which Facebook operates and other social media platforms, and they need to do a great deal more. But Google, for instance, now has a list of publications it considers credible. And I think you make it if they look at your depth of archives, so how long you've been around, and the frequency of update. So they recognize that you're a news platform that's doing news as it breaks. And so that privileges you and serves you up a little. But that also means that it's skewed towards publishers who are already large. And so the little chaps like us still have to sort of scramble every day to be in the game.
My question is on Indian media. I contradict with your saying 4 or 5 people shouting in different rooms. I've seen minimum 15-20 people and have changed the screen size.
TV, so I don't know.
And that is one reason TV companies are enhancing the screen size also nowadays. So my question is there any kind of a TRP that each individual brings some kind of a views, or is it simply they bring all these guys?
I beg your pardon, I didn't catch the last part.
TRP, does each individual person bring a TRP?
If 20 people can...
the TRP is essentially a broad survey, and there are many problems with the way that's conducted. The Broadcasters Association has suggested ways it can be changed, but that is a big problem.
I just want to say thank you so much, Caroline and Naresh, for a fascinating discussion. I just wanted to also record our amazing gratitude and thanks to Scroll.in for being one of the few news outlets that we can trust. It's increasingly one of the most trusted news sites. And yeah, I think it deserves a round of applause. Because the work that you do is truly courageous, and it's bringing the stories out, not just to Indians here, but also Indians like me in the diaspora. I was going to ask about the challenges, but you've mentioned some of them. And you mentioned that you're a small player. What do we as your readers, what can we do to help you extend your reach and extend the progressive nature of your reporting?
So first, I'd like to, thank you for what you've said, but there are many of us who are in this together. There's Quint, there's The Wire, there's the Indian Express, there's NDTV, and I think among the most encouraging things we've seen over this last month of protests is the amazing spurt in subscriptions that all of us have had. I think this was the moment at which audiences finally recognized that independent media needs to be supported. And that's what we need. We need people to pay for what we do, including the Australian, if you read it regularly.
Yeah, I just...
I am of old school. I read the newspaper. I also follow the social media. But I have always the comfort of thinking that the editorial in a print paper, print media, is something that I can believe in because it shows me some kind of a courage, some statement from the people, and that is their viewpoint or their policy. And the policy has never failed me, at least, in letting me hear some good things there. So I still go to my favorite newspapers and read their editorials very carefully, even though the same newspaper would print an article and say, this is the writer's personal opinion, meaning to say I wash my hands off any responsibility of going with that opinion. That's one thing I wanted to say. And the second thing is, both of you, while you were speaking about your papers and your media, you were also separating the media person from the management somehow. Saying, so I again liked it very much because we have a Caroline, we have a Fernandes, we have a Ravish Kumar who would perhaps say no to any pressurized policy from their mother concern and then come forward and say something that's a responsible social statement. That's
But look, and I think, did I do something to it? Thank you. I think that's very important because there is a perception that somehow we are told what to say or we are told what to do. We're not at all. Australia has been through some really interesting debates in the last couple of years. For example, we had a vote on same-sex marriage. Should two women be allowed to marry each other? Should two men be allowed to marry each other? And I was firmly of the view, yes, absolutely. If you are lucky enough in this life to find somebody who loves you, you should be able to express that the same way as anyone else. And nobody at my newspaper stopped me from saying that. Nobody attempted to coerce me not to say that. Many of my colleagues agreed with me and published that view. There were others on the newspaper who were completely, implacably opposed, often on religious grounds, on Catholic grounds, conservative grounds, and they too expressed their opinion. And then the vote was held, and the Australian people came rushing to my side of the argument, and I was so pleased to see it. But nobody tried to shut us down, which is the main point of a proper democracy, that we all have our say.
Caroline, you need to know that in India, newspaper managements do influence a great deal of what happens in papers, and which has led to, I'm not sure you're familiar with this awful sort of epithet that's often thrown at us, that we are prostitutes. And unfortunately, that can sometimes be true for people working in some newspapers.
Yeah, one last question before, yeah.
Good evening. Just a small question. Taking it forward from, can you hear me? Yeah. Taking it forward from what the gentleman there said. In India, this is to both the Indian journalists. In India, we have 22 languages that are spoken, and I wanted to know the influence on the vote bank, the masses, that English dailies, newspaper, print newspaper, as well as yours, which is an online newspaper, have a true influence on. You know, the right things you say, the right things you'd want to say, you know, away from being aligned to the government propaganda. What about regional newspapers in print still? Do they still exist? And or English newspapers, do they truly have an influence, or is it just for the urban class, which we all understand that barely even votes? It's not even, you know, a serious vote bank.
Well, many things you have asked. One, the regional press exists. You know, it exists very strong. The biggest newspapers in India are not Times of India, etc. It's the Dainik Bhaskar, isn't it? Dainik Bhaskar, yeah, Malayalam, Manorama, etc. So they are there, very striving, and it is also true that they are far more influential than English media in forming opinions. And in fact, the Hindi media in particular in the 1990s had a very, very negative impact in forming opinions in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, on the communal issue. So, so there, yes, the English media is consumed by a very small proportion, but until now, they were the decision makers, for good or bad. So they had a huge influence. Now, what has happened is that the importance of the English-speaking class has perhaps reduced a bit. I mean, I would just hazard it has reduced a bit, but it still retains an influence. So the English press, print, online, TV does have an influence even now. Perhaps not as much as before, but it is a fact that we have to recognize that the language media has a far greater role in forming opinions. So,
Ram,
all kinds of opinion, yeah.
Rajdeep was at Manthan 2 weeks back. And Rajdeep was saying how a very new Hindi initiative called Lalan Top has taken over so much viewership that he often feels like dropping the English television and focusing on that. So obviously the vernacular has huge...
Well, actually, it's both ways. He was talking about one initiative, but there's a large dark space out there as well. Okay, before I conclude, I just want to talk about one thing, Caroline. You say that, you're almost saying that every opinion has a right to express itself. Yes, I have the right to hold whatever opinion. But the job of an editor is to assess, okay, the value of that opinion. Now, I've been an editor 10, 15 years, etc. But if ever an article came to me making a very cogent argument about how Muslims in India should be second-class citizens, that is an opinion, I wouldn't publish it. I wouldn't say that, look, the reader has a right to not look at that article, the reader has a right to read it and dismiss it. No, job of an editor has to be to assess the value of that article. I mean, whether it's about climate science or about, some kind of mob violence, and then take a decision. I mean, other than those who have political views, I mean, a reader with a strong political, that's a different thing. But why is a person an editor? It's not just about choosing the news, but it's also assessing the quality of opinion while ensuring a diversity of views. Obviously, the most vibrant publication is one which offers a diverse set of views. But we can't say that every opinion has a right to be propagated. Every opinion has a right to be expressed. I can express it to you, but I can't use Naresh's publication to spread hate.
What you're talking about there is not an opinion, it's a hate crime. So, and there are laws against anti-discrimination laws, there are defamation laws, there are libel laws. There are already a range of laws that restrict what you can and can't say. And clearly, you cannot say that Muslims are second-class citizens, firstly because it's false, secondly because it's a hate crime. And it incites violence. And if you incite violence against other members of your community, there is no place for you in a civil discourse. Of course not. But that's not what we're talking about in Australia. We don't have the critical, desperate problem that you are facing right now here in India. We are talking about one section of the community wanting to shut down another section of the community because they don't agree with their political views. That's different. The only way to win over a racist or a homophobe or a person with whom you disagree is to have the argument. Because if you don't have the argument, you will push it underground, and we know what happens when you push hate underground. It finds a way to come up over here, more powerful than ever before. And that we have to prevent.
Naresh, some last words on this? Sorry, anything else?
No, definitely. A lot of what we have in our public discourse is hate speech. We know how that ended up in Rwanda, and I think we need to be really careful about how we regulate the media.